I dedicate this morning's teaching to my mother, in that Hetty Spitz, Herminia Henya Sarah, would have turned 100 years old this past week. October 20th would have been her centennial. It's been almost 25 years since my mom has passed, but she endures for me, for her children, grandchildren, all who knew her, as an extraordinary person. In fact, tomorrow, which was my wife Linda's suggestion, we have a Zoom gathering of all her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren to tell stories about her and to reflect on what she would be proud of about us, what would be her nachas in harvesting her descendants. And so I dedicate the teaching to my mom. And one comment that I will link to this Devar Torah. My mom had many strengths. In my creating this Zoom, I included a collection of her aphorisms. She was remarkably quotable. And when she died, spontaneously, each of her children independently made lists of her quotes. And I gathered all those quotes together within that month of mourning and wrote a sentence of commentary, and I sent that out to all my siblings and nieces and nephews for tomorrow's gathering. And the thing that I wanted to focus in on is she had an unusual ability to see the good in others and to accept people's failings. And I say unusual because if she had an uncanny gift, it was to understand people. It made her an excellent wig salesman, her business. She knew a customer, but more, with a quality of kindness, she just knew people and was able, even in our own home, to always prioritize shalom bayit, the peace in the home. Our Torah reading this Shabbat is the story of Noach. And it's among the first parts of Torah I ever learned, which means I learned it young enough that I can do much of it by heart, the value of learning in our youth. Ele toldot Noach. These are the generations of Noach. Noach ish tzaddik. Noah was a righteous man. Tamim haya b'doratav. With integrity for his generation. Im Elohim hitalech Noach. With God, Noach walked. Now that's high accolade. In fact, there is nobody else for whom it is said, Ish Tzaddik, he was righteous, except Job, who is called Tam V'Yashar, of integrity and straightness. But this notion that he was Ish Tzaddik, accolades. But there's a qualifier. And the qualifier is Tamim Haya B'Doratav. He had integrity, or he was good for his generation. What does that mean for his generation? And in the Talmud, in Masechet Sanhedrin 108a, 108b, those two rabbis who were Chavruta, study partners, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish debate. Rabbi Yochanan says he was good for his generation, but if he lived in any other time, he would not have been considered particularly meritorious. Now I will add, Rabbi Yochanan was of a kind of an aristocratic family. Reish Lakish, whose study partner, we're told, was hard school in his beginnings. Reish Lakish says, Tamim haya b'doratav, righteous was he in his generation. If he had lived in any other generation, he would have even been more extraordinary. Even in his time, he was able to be a nonconformist. And so the rabbis debate, was Noah, as compared to another time, only good because of the tough time in which he lived, or was indeed exemplary because he was able to be and learn from those around him. Well, going forward, the rabbis make a distinction between Noah and Abraham. That's foreshadowing next week's Torah reading, in which Abraham, when told that Sodom and Gomorrah, the evil cities, are going to be destroyed, begins to bargain with God and says to God, "Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat," will the judge of the world not act justly? And negotiates the number down of righteous. Abraham is a leader who cares about others. Noah, he retreats into the ark with his family. And so the Midrash, the rabbis will say that Noah was a good person, but was not a leader, not one able to, in fact, reach beyond his own family needs. For him, the question was, what does my family need, rather than what does the larger world need? And so the rabbis will say that Abraham's ability to take in the larger world around him is what will qualify him and his wife Sarah for being the creator of a covenantal people, but not Noah. Noah is of a covenant of the whole of humanity, but falls short. The rabbis of Eastern Europe said of Noah in Yiddish that he was a tzaddik im peltz. Peltz means a fur coat. They say Abraham, when he was cold, lit a fire so that everybody around him and himself could get warm. Noah, when he was cold, put on a fur coat. He was the only one who was warm. He only took care of himself. And in that regard, he fell short. Well, at the end of the Noah story, in our Torah reading this morning in chapter 9, there's the aftermath of Noah emerging from the ark with his 3 sons, their wives, his wife. And what is the first thing Noah does? The first thing this Ish Tzaddik does when he emerges from the ark, verse 20, Noah, the tiller of the soil, was the first to plant a vineyard, Vayita Karam. He drank the wine and he became drunk, and he uncovered himself within his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his 2 brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a cloth, placed it against both their backs, and walking backwards, they covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way, so that they did not see their father's nakedness. Last night I talked about Sham, who saw his father's nakedness and the curse that he would be a slave to his brothers, and how that was a source of preaching in antebellum South before the Civil War as to why it was God's decree that the people of Africa, the descendants of Shem, are to be our slaves. I don't want to focus on that piece, but I bring it to your attention to convey how this story in America and in other places, but particularly in America, was used as justification for slavery. But that's a sidebar. Back to Noah's fall. Here is Noah the righteous. He goes in to the ark 40 days and 40 nights, and another 40 days and 40 nights with rain before he emerges. And the first thing he does is he plants a vineyard. And in the Torah, as is the nature of Torah, we're not told times. We're not told how long it is before planting the vineyard. We're not told how long it is before the grapes become ripe, how long it is before it is made into wine, how long after that Noah becomes drunk. But in the Talmud, in Sanhedrin, that same tractate that deals with the administration of justice, in 70a, there is a discussion of drunkenness, ben sorer umoreh, that rebellious, drunk son. And in that context, they come back to this story and they say there was a miracle. And that is that when Noah planted the vineyard, within a day, the grapes were ripened, and his first act was to make the wine in that same day, and he got drunk. So let's pause for a moment to consider that Noah has come through a very traumatic time. As he emerges from this sequestration, this time in which he had been isolated with his family, he looks out at the world and he sees no neighbors. His neighbors are gone. The world is in chaos. And in fact, the first blessing for Noah as he emerges from the ark by God, verse 1 of chapter 9, as if creation is being renewed. Peru urvu umilu et haaretz. That first commandment to Adam is now given to Noah. Be fruitful and multiply and fill up the earth. And it gets even repeated in verse 7. Va'adam peru urvu. Be fruitful and multiply. Shirtzu va'aretz irvu va. Abound in the earth and increase on it. And so here Noah, as he looks at the world, the man who was called Ish Tzaddik, the righteous man, he not only turns inward, he, if you will, by getting drunk, blots out the world around him. It's a deeply troubling story. Here is Ish Tzaddik, and in his drunkenness, apparently has left himself in such a compromised state in his nakedness, in his erva. And the rabbis will get into some extreme imagining as to what this erva is, that Cham either saw or participated in. It's all X-rated, and I won't get into it in this moment. But it's to say he had shamed himself in such a way that 2 of his 3 sons walk with clothing over them so they don't see their father walking in backwards. He has fallen from what would be an admirable state to a shameful state. The Maggit of Dubno is a wonderful teacher. He lived in Vilna. He was a member of the synagogue of the Vilna of Gaon, which means the 18th century, early 18th century, mid-18th century. And the Maggid of Dubno was a master teacher by parable. And he focuses in on this moment. And he tells the following tale. Once upon a time, there was a man who came to synagogue on Parsha Noach. I'm going to paraphrase and make the story my own for us. And so he was sitting in synagogue and he heard his rabbi teach. And his rabbi said that Noah was rewarded by God with an added blessing. And God said, Noah, because you are a righteous man, because you were willing to be sequestered with your family and help recreate the world, the first thing that you engage in, the first thing when you emerge from the ark and see as your goal, I will allow it to prosper. And the first thing that Noah, a man of the field, wanted was a vineyard, and he planted that vineyard and it grew. And so Noah was rewarded with his wish fulfilled. Now this image for this simple Jew remained with him, that there's an ability to be blessed by a tzaddik. With what it is that you get can be multiplied. And so he went and he found the great rabbi in his town, and he said, my learning is that I too would wish to be like Noah. I would wish to be blessed. Can you give me the blessing of Noah by God, that what I put my attention on, that will be a reward? And the sage smiled and he said, yes. When you go home, know that the first thing you put your attention on, that will be your reward. It will be multiplied in its success. And so as this man began to walk home, he thought, what is it that I most need? What is it I want multiplied? He thought, well, it's financial wealth. I need more money. I struggle. So when I get home, I'm going to get all my money that I keep hidden in satchels, and I'm going to start counting those coins so that I'm able to take an inventory of what I have. And clearly, because of that blessing, it will be multiplied. So as soon as he walked through the door, he barked at his wife, Hannah, get me all my money. Bring me my satchels. She was immediately taken back. He hadn't even said hello. Taken back by the tone in his voice, and she went looking for his satchels, but he would hide the satchels. They weren't so easy to find. And he yelled out, Hannah, why are you taking so long? Well, she stopped looking. She went back into the room and said, why are you yelling at me? What's with your tone of voice? And soon they began to argue with each other, and soon he forgot that what he had sought to do was to count his money as their fight escalated. And so it was that petty fight became increased and an enduring fight, so that there was not to be found shalom bayit in their home again. That's a bit of a sad story told by the Maggit of Dubno. A story that says that where we put our attention, that focus is what gets multiplied. And when we forget what our focus is, sometimes what can get multiplied is the negative rather than the positive. We are sequestered, and we will emerge. How we will emerge and when, that's an unknown. But what is true, back to the story and the parallel to Noah, is we are sequestered. And when we emerge, that will be a day of celebration. And again, it may not be a day, it may be a process. But it will be a reopening to freedom, a reopening to pursuing more fully our goals. And what we pursue, where we put our focus, will be determined even now. But what we see as essential, as important. And in that regard, back to Noah, I have a concern. For Noah's shortcoming as a tzaddik that we see compared to Abraham is he was only focused on his own family and not the larger world. I was disappointed to know that in our presidential debates, there was not much focus on foreign affairs. There was not much focus on how we as a nation struggling with COVID are contributing to COVID in the world. I am concerned about a turning inward as a nation and turning inward as citizens that fail to be aware of the needs and the opportunity to be a light for others. Tzaddik im peltz, a righteous person with a fur coat who warms only him or herself, falls short of the religious calling. And in that regard, one last quote. Jonathan Sacks, who I so admire, has this as his theme in his teaching of this Shabbat. Namely, the focus of his Devar Torah, which you too can receive by subscribing, is to be righteous is not to be a leader. And he quotes God in his calling to Ezekiel. Chapter 2, verse 3. God said to me, "Son of Adam, I send you to the children of Israel, to the rebellious nations that have rebelled against me. They and their ancestors have defiantly sinned against me to this very day. And the children are brazen-faced and hard-hearted. I send you, Ezekiel, to them. You shall say to them, thus said the Lord of Hashem Elohim, now they, whether they will heed, whether they will refrain, for a rebellious house are they will know at least that a prophet has been among them." Rabbi Sachs emphasizes that we have a duty to act, we have a duty to speak on behalf of God, on behalf of righteousness, on behalf of goodness, even when we may fear that it will have no impact. But the calling of a leader, the calling of a nation that is called to be good, is to do, to speak, to be concerned, even when the impact is questionable. But to do, to act, to be concerned on behalf of goodness, on behalf of the light of God, to create a light that warms others, not just put on the fur coat that takes care of our needs. Ribono Shalom, Master of the universe, on this Shabbat, in which I bring my mother to mind in honor of her 100th birthday, I feel the privilege of having been her child. For indeed, she modeled a quality of wisdom to me and her other children, both with aphorisms that were second nature to her, but more, with acts that created shalom bayit, the ability to overcome negativity in how she indeed saw shortcomings in others, and an ability to reach out with a generosity of spirit. I pause to consider, my mother, the wig maker, was honored by the City of Hope because any bald person, often due to chemo, was there to get a wig from Hetty. Hetty was always concerned how she could meet the needs, but do so with open eyes, not to be taken advantage of because she was no fool, but to be an open heart to give where she could. Ribono Shalom, we who are sequestered, like Noah and his family, may we be reminded of where we want our focus when we emerge. May it be beyond ourselves. May it be for harnessing our energies to create a better world. May that, with your goodness, be multiplied in success. And we say, Amen.